Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight we're going to deal with the yin and yang of television and show business. And we're going to start with our feature, Garry Shandling, who died recently at the age of 66. I loved Garry Shandling. What a genius he was. He was a nice Jewish boy from Chicago whose family moved to Arizona when he was a little boy because his brother had cystic fibrosis. He studied electrical engineering at the University of Arizona, but then went into creative writing and ultimately went into comedy. He was a comedy writer. He was a great stand-up comedian, probably as good as anybody of his generation. But his real mark on show business and comedy was the television show he created, The Larry Sanders Show. He had been so successful as a stand-up comic on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson that Johnny often asked him to guest host. Garry didn't want to do the grueling 5-night-a-week gig if Johnny left the show, but what he did do was he created a parody of the talk show with The Larry Sanders Show on HBO, and the unique feature of the show was that Garry borrowed from one of his comedy mentors, George Burns, who on the Burns and Allen show in the 50s would break the fourth wall. But Garry Shandling didn't just break the fourth wall on Larry Sanders, he smashed it. And at the same time, he parodied himself, others, and the whole industry. Here he is talking with one of his contemporaries and admirers, Jerry Seinfeld, who pays tribute to that.
So when you did Larry Sanders, which besides being one of my favorite sitcoms of all time, you invented a certain kind of air on TV that had never existed before. There's a certain kind of air on I Love Lucy. There's a certain kind of air on Mary Tyler Moore. You created an original content form. You ever watch TV, The Office, Modern Family, and go, oh, look, they're still doing me. They're still doing that thing I invented.
I knew when I explained to HBO what I wanted to do, I couldn't say it's a little bit of this show and a little bit of that show. I couldn't even do that. And I mean, they thought I was crazy. I said, this doesn't even exist.
It was absolute genius. And the way we're going to pay tribute to Garry Shandling is we're going to play a little excerpt from the series that Jerry Seinfeld does, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. And a couple months before his death, Garry Shandling did an episode with Jerry Seinfeld, and they talked about all sorts of stuff. And it gives you an insight into Garry Shandling's genius and to a certain extent his philosophy on life. I don't think Garry Shandling liked to admit it, but in reality he was actually a very serious guy. You also note that they talk about two other comedians whose podcasts we've done, David Brenner and of course Robin Williams.
Garry?
Oh, Jerry. When do we do the phone call that would be on there?
Now. We're doing it now.
Oh, my God. I haven't talked to you in so long. I can't wait to see you. And you edit, right? Because everything in my life needs to be edited.
Well, everything in your life comes after a 19-second pause.
I don't know why you say that.
You know, I was an electrical engineering major at the University of Arizona, and that taught me the discipline of working out formulas and having no other life, because you had to work so hard to get that stuff right.
But of course, that was not as difficult as writing comedy.
No, because there's ultimately an answer to an equation.
There's an answer to a joke.
Well, I don't think Einstein bounced it off a crowd. What do you think of this? A plus C equals D squared. No?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to get anything. I go up on stage, and Jim McCauley from The Tonight Show is standing back here.
And he was the guardian of the gate.
So Jim McCauley says to me, that was so good. How's next Tuesday for you on The Tonight Show? And that's what changed my life. You know, I listen to the blues. It's the exact same words I say. People go, this is fantastic. But when I say my baby left me, they go, stop complaining. So one time I was with the Dalai Lama. He said, I understand you have some joke about the Buddha. How would you like to be in this position? Your Holiness. And you know, he's looking at me, he's got the glasses on, he's the Dalai Lama. I'm talking to the Dalai Lama. I'm comfortable with that. And I said, well, Buddha never got married because his wife would have said, are you going to sit around the house like that all day? Well, I'm meditating, honey. Well, why don't you meditate while you're taking out the trash? And there's dead silence in this little hut, except for the 3 American monks who are laughing hysterically. And so then I explained to him the joke. In American culture, the husbands and wives sometimes argue because the wife thinks the husband is lazy and sitting around. And he goes, oh, funny. That's what you want to do. You want to have a 3-minute gap from when you tell the joke to when you get the laugh.
You know, David Brennan passed away last year. You ever think about, like, all that material.
I'm sorry. So I'm at a stage in my life where I actually care about the person. Here's what I thought you were going to say. Did you ever realize when David Brenner died and Robin, the actual impermanence of life? I never thought, God, there goes a lot of material. That's hilarious that you think that way.
Well, that was the hard part. Anyone could just pop out and live. That's easy. See, all that material, he worked so hard on it. It's just gone. It doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. And it took so much work to create it.
That material and your material is purely a vehicle for you to express your spirit and your soul and your being. And that's why you're fantastic. So you keep...
So it doesn't have any value beyond that?
It doesn't have any value beyond you expressing yourself spiritually in a very soulful, spiritual way. It's why you're on the planet. God, open up the sunroof. What year is this? So when you saw Robin Williams the first time, you don't remember everything he said. It was just that his presence.
So being completely honest, the shock of Robin Williams committing suicide, were you completely surprised?
The news broadcasters were on TV saying, why would Robin Williams want to kill himself? He just finished doing a TV series. He's got 2 movies in the can, and he's scheduled to shoot another one. Why would you kill yourself? And I was sitting there with somebody, and I said, she just gave the reason. May Robin rest in peace. I'm sure, like me, you were stunned. I don't know how you felt. Mm-hmm. I was sitting there watching CNN anyway, and they broke in and said Robin Williams killed himself. And I sat there, and I was frozen. This is totally true. And I was in that kitchen of mine. Then Wolf Blitzer says, 63 is so young. And then I looked up with a little hope, because I'm the same age as Robin, right? And then I realized 63 is so young is a phrase you never hear relative to anything but death.
Right.
63 is so young to be playing in the NFL. You don't, there's nothing.
You have to die in your 60s for them to say, boy, he was young.
You know, I went in to get a CT scan on last Wednesday, and I go in there, and the guy says, the tech guy, hey, Garry Shandling, I'm a big fan. He said, I did a CT scan a year ago of you. He said, do you have cancer? I said, no. And he said, oh, good, so you're still alive. He said, because I was watching the news, and it seems like if he had passed away, I would have heard about it on the news. And I said, well, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know if they would have broken in or anything, but, you know, I didn't know what to say to the guy. He kept at it. And he said, oh, that's so great that Garry Shandling's still alive. What I want at my funeral is an actual boxing referee to do a count. And at 5, just wave it off and say he's not getting up.
Well, Garry, we're going to miss you. All I can say is I hope at your funeral there was no flipping, the pants didn't make your ass look big, and I sure hope they got that boxing referee. Well, if Garry Shandling was a yin of television, then our next subject, Earl Hamner Jr., was the yang. Earl Hamner Jr. died recently at the age of 92. He is best known for his creation of one of the most successful television series ever, and it couldn't be more completely opposite than the Larry Sanders Show. It was the Waltons. Earl Hamner Jr. was from rural Virginia, a large family, and he wrote an autobiographical novel about his family called Spencer's Mountain. In 1970, Spencer's Mountain was adapted for television for a Christmas one-off called The Homecoming. And The Homecoming was so popular that it was adapted into a television show called The Waltons. The Waltons ran for 9 years. It was literally one of the top shows of the 1970s. Made a star out of Richard Thomas. Brought people like Will Geer and Ellen Corby, who'd been in show business a long time, into prominence. And it sort of introduced Michael Learned. Here, Earl Hamner Jr. talks about the process.
I was most thrilled to get Richard Thomas for the role of John Boy, because I had seen Richard in a movie called Red Sky at Morning, and it was wonderful. He did a wonderful acting job, and I didn't know it at the time, but he'd been acting since he was 6 years old. He did a stage play called Sunrise at Campobello, and he played the 6-year-old Franklin Roosevelt. He was marvelous, and as it turned out, he was perfect in the role. I often said that he made a better John Boy than I did of being me. But he's a very intelligent actor. He drew, I think, a great deal on his father's upbringing on a farm in Kentucky. He was just perfect. I had never a quarrel with Richard. But when I sold my book, Spencer's Mountain, to Warner Brothers, they claimed, rightfully so, that they had bought all rights to it, including the names. And because Spencer's Mountain was still viable as a film, they felt that they asked us to change the name. the family and the characters' names. And so there had been some Waltons in my family way back. And also, I thought the name Walton sounded sturdy and Virginian and American, and it proved to be workable. It's one of those things where everything fell into place nicely. All the parts made a perfect whole. I think the story reminded people a lot of their own experiences, or the way they might have wished that their own experiences had been. And so they reacted with letters and telephone calls. We had a flood of audience reaction. The chairman of the board of CBS saw it and was moved by it. And he said to someone, "We've been taking from the barrel too long. Let's put something back and turn this into a series." So when the chairman of the board of CBS says that, you make a series, which we did. And so the people in the homecoming then became, the Spencers became the Waltons. So it became a 1-hour show. Once that was done, it got around the industry that this was a show about poor people living in the Depression years in the backwoods of Virginia. And everybody said, well, that won't last. And consequently, I had practically no interference in doing the scripts. They let me alone, which is, again, a great luxury.
Well, Earl Hamner did other stuff. He did a television and movie adaptation of Charlotte's Web. He did the television adaptation of Heidi, the famous broadcast that interrupted an NFL game in the last 2 minutes and changed the rules for interrupting NFL games. And when he was a young man working in Cincinnati, he took over a disc jockey job from another writer, Rod Serling. They became friends, and when he moved out to Hollywood, he wrote a couple of screenplays for Twilight Zone. Most of them weren't especially strong. The only one I really liked was Ring-a-Ding Girl. But another one was called The Hunt, and it was a readaptation of something he had written a decade earlier for the Kate Smith Hour. It was one of the first things he wrote, and it has the distinction of introducing James Dean. This is James Dean's first introduction on television. He plays an angel in a 1953 production called The Hound of Heaven opposite John Carradine.
I'm looking for a Mr. Hyder Simpson and a hound dog named Rib.
That's yours, son?
Yeah, I figured it was. Well, if you and Rip's all set, we might as well be moseying along.
Mosey where?
Heaven, Mr. Simpson.
Now, like I was telling that fella, I ain't going to set foot in heaven without Rip.
Oh, you didn't get messed up with nobody in there, did you?
That fella there behind the gate. He wouldn't let Rip in, so I didn't go in. Well, that'd be just a place of hell without Rip.
You ain't far from wrong, Mr. Simpson. That is hell. Heaven's on down the road there, Peace.
Well, how come that fella lied to me like that?
I don't never give up. Always trying to get our folk in there right at the last minute.
How come you wanted to keep Rip out?
See, he was afeard that Rip would have warned you. And he would have, too, once he got a whiff of that brimstone. You see, Mr. Simpson, a man, he walked right into hell with both eyes open. But not even a devil can fool a dog.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we have to close with the theme from the Waltons, even if I'm not crazy about it, and one of the famous recurring themes from the show.
That was something that we actually did when I was growing up. We would say goodnight to each other all over the house, and sometimes we'd get carried away and we'd go say so many good nights, and my father, who had to get up early in the morning, would say, "All right, that's enough." And Richard Thomas, after his first trip to Virginia, came back and he said, "I always wondered how you people could say goodnight and be heard. But then I saw the house and it's such a little cracker box that now I understand."
Quiet down now and get some sleep.
Night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Night, Ben.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children.
Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.